The truth about multitasking, about focusing on two different things and doing them at the same time. That's what we're going to talk about today in today's episode of the Accelerated Achievement Show. Welcome to episode 10 of the Accelerated Achievement Show. And we're going to talk about the truth about multitasking because a lot of people, and we get taught in the education system and by others, and we get shared that multitasking is this way and it's a skill and it's something incredible. But the truth behind multitasking is that multitasking is tremendously ineffective. Multitasking actually takes away from your work, and more than a skill that people put on their resumes and they're like, yes, I'm a great multitasker. More than that, multitasking is probably the biggest killer, one of the biggest killers of actual productivity. For example, if you get two people and one person, they're focused for an hour, another person is multitasking on two different things during that hour, that person will get far more done, far more net done than this person, even though they're focusing on two things. Allow me to explain, because if you're someone who multitasks right now, I hope that by the end of this episode, by the end of this video, you reconsider your strategy a little bit. I used to think that multitasking was a great thing. I used to have 12 tabs open on my computer and be working between them, flicking between those things. Then I learned some stuff. And as I dove into this about productivity and about multitasking, discovered a few things that changed my approach and revolutionized the way I work. And I hope that in this episode, I can share that with you here. You see, research now shows that it's actually not possible. It's physically impossible in our brain. It's impossible for us to actually consciously focus on two different paths, on two different things. You can't consciously focus them at the same time. At the same time, you can't focus. So when you think you're multitasking, what you're actually doing in the brain, no matter whether you're the most talented multitasker in the world, or whether you suck, or wherever you are on that spectrum, on that scale, you're not actually multitasking. What you're doing, and I used to suffer with this as well, I used to go through this multitasking delusion, but what you're actually doing is you're doing something called activity switching, meaning you're very quickly switching between two things where you're switching or what seems so seamlessly that you think you're doing them at the same time, but really you're not. You're focusing on one, then you're focusing on the other, then you're focusing on the other. Now, the reason this is ineffective and the reason I implore you to rethink this and actually test this in your life is because it's kind of like, imagine a big hall, a big sports hall, and on one side, you're doing an exam. You're filling out questions in an exam. On the other side of the hall, you're cooking a meal. And you're doing those two things. So when you're at home and you think that you're cooking a great meal and at the same time you can do your work for your business or for your career, it's these two things. So imagine that sports hall. This is kind of like the physical representation of what goes on in your mind when you multitask or when you activity switch between two things. So you're in that big hole. One side you have this, the other side you're doing this. And okay, so you're at home, you're doing, let's say, an exam, or let's say doing some work while you're cooking a meal. And you're focused on the meal, you do fight a few seconds of the meal, so you're on one side of the hall. For a few seconds, you put some vegetables and some fruit and stuff into a bowl, and you're preparing this great meal. Then you run over to the other side of the sports hall, and you fill out like two answers. Then you run across again. You run across to the other side and you do the meal again, you cook some stuff in the meal, then you run to the other side and you're doing that. That's kind of like what happens in your mind. That's a physical representation of what goes on in your mind. And you could probably see why that would be ineffective. The time that you're taking to actually run is actually taking away from the effectiveness. Because when people multitask, they think that if you can get two stuff done at the same time, you get twice the results. Ta-da! You get 2 times the great results because you're doing two things at the same time. But firstly, as we've already talked about, you're not doing them at the same time, you're switching. And your mind has to switch between that, and there's a transition time. Kind of like running across the hall. Running to one side, then doing something, then running to the other side. And that activity switching is actually what slows you down. Meaning if for 1 second you're focused on this, 1 second you're focused on this, it takes 2 seconds or whatever it is for you, but it takes longer in the middle. Meaning in those 5 seconds, you may be only getting those 2 seconds of work done compared to if you're focused. So I hope that made sense for you, but that's how multitasking works. And research shows we can't actually focus on 2 things. What you're doing is you're switching between the 2. Now, I'm going to contradict myself or give you some polar opposite evidence. Because when you're doing something that is unconscious while you're doing something that takes conscious effort, that's when it's not technically multitasking, and that's when it's actually hugely effective. You can apply this into your life. This is something extremely practical you can apply into your life to get so much more done, so much more achieved, squeeze as much juice and happiness, excitement and work and achievement out of every day, whether you're working on your business and you want to increase your productivity and your results in your business every day, whether it's with your fitness, wherever it is. But here's how it works. Here's the other thing. Because multitasking or activity switching, what it's more traditionally represented, more accurately represented as, is very different from when you're doing, that's when you're doing 2 conscious things. When you're cooking a meal, that requires conscious effort. When you're doing this, they both require conscious effort. When you're doing something that doesn't require conscious effort, together with something that does require conscious effort, that's when you can actually increase your productivity. That's great. For example, if you're running on the treadmill while you're listening to an educational video, or you're listening to an episode of the Accelerated Achievement Show, or you're doing work, that's effective because running on a treadmill doesn't require any of your conscious focus, any of your conscious effort. It's kind of like if you have a computer, there's background applications running, but they don't take away from the performance because they're background applications. They're not focused on them compared to if you have things that you need to consciously focus on. So if you're doing something like that, so when you're doing something unconscious, like running or like walking to the shops, you don't need to think about every step you take. No. You don't need to think about the steps you're taking and consciously walking. Yes, right foot, left foot. No, you don't need to do that. That's why if you're walking to the shops and listening to an audiobook, that's effective. One's unconscious, the other one's a conscious behavior, conscious focus. So your attention is on the audiobook. But you're doing both of those things together, that's productive. But back to the delusion. I'm going to call it a delusion now. The delusion of multitasking. So don't do 2 things that are consciously, if you're consciously replying to social media, which is a conscious act, and you're attempting to get work done together, 1 + 1 does not equal 2. You're not getting twice as much work done. You're actually getting 1 + 1 = 1.5. You're actually detracting from the value. So the alternative is something I call counterbalancing, or the imbalance. So it's not about doing 2 things at the same time and having them balanced during that time. It's about you doing something in focus, in complete focus during one period of time, then completely switching to the other thing and counterbalancing that. So let's say for an hour, focus on just the social media. Then for the next hour, focus just on the work. Whatever it is for you. But it's about that counterbalancing and focus compared to detracting from the value, detracting from the results and the things you're achieving, which stack up in the long run. But it's not about you multitasking or activity switching. It's about you counterbalancing. That's the alternative. So I hope you learned a lot from this episode of the Accelerated Achievement Show about multitasking, whatever your biggest lesson was, whether it's the multitasking, how it actually works in the brain, about that transition time in between, and that being one of the biggest things that actually takes away from productivity and from achievement and from achieving results in a period of time, or whether it's about counterbalancing the value of that. So if you're multitasking right now like I used to, and your life is dependent on it, and you have all these tabs and all these different things you're doing, your attention is so scattered, I hope this episode opens your eyes and helps you really take a far higher strategic approach when it comes to, okay, how am I creating the result that I want? How am I accelerating my achievement? How am I getting the most done in the shortest amount of time so I can do what I want, or do more of the things that I want to do, or get more work done? So how can you counterbalance? How can you be in focus instead of multitasking? And how can you stop multitasking or avoid it as much as you can? and work in a greater state of focus now that you have a new understanding. I'm a huge believer that understanding and awareness, if you have a problem, you need to be able to be aware of it and understand it before you can fix it. So I hope that video has added some value for you here. So if you enjoyed this episode of the Accelerated Achievement Show, comment below with your biggest takeaway and like it below. And also subscribe for more episodes. Look forward to adding you more value based on what my research has been, traveling all around the world and teaching people about accelerated learning, accelerated skill development, and teaching people about, okay, how can you achieve incredible things short periods of time and all these time hacks. How do you get the most out of your time? So if you enjoyed this episode, comment below with your biggest takeaway. What was your biggest lesson, your one biggest lesson? Like this below. Subscribe for more episodes and stay tuned for more episodes so I can add you more value in the Accelerated Achievement Show.
Achievement accelerated with the Accelerated Achievement Show.